Hello, Khendum. Thank you for offering to do a quick interview. I was wondering if before we jump in, if you wouldn't mind giving just a brief visual introduction and maybe introducing yourself, what courses you're teaching, that kind of thing.
Thanks, Parker, for interviewing me. So, my name is Khendum Gyabak-Kumka. I'm the Director of Online Teaching and Learning here at MCAT. Quick visual introduction of myself. I am a BIPOC female. I'm originally from Bhutan, if that's interesting. I have a little chihuahua. His name is Crixus that I'm holding. Is my little anxiety dog. What else? So I have taught online courses. I just taught one at Indiana University. I teach instructional design. Another class I am intending to teach is design theory, design philosophy. And I've also taught first year seminars at University of Wisconsin La Crosse. And I've also taught pre-service teachers at Indiana University called Using Computers in Education. So it's mainly a tech integration kind of class. That was in person, but more of a hybrid blended format that I've taught.
Absolutely. So it sounds like you have a very extensive background in online teaching, hybrid teaching, some face-to-face teaching. And given the background, I'm wondering if you have maybe like a to-do list or a checklist. How do you generally prepare for those first weeks of an online class? Or what are some strategies that you use that you really recommend for other instructors?
Absolutely. So I think when we think about online or generally what the research tells us, right, is what students really want in an online environment. And what students really want is timely feedback, clear expectations, instruction that's relevant, assessments that are authentic, right? Also like showing a bit of your personality. I think, and that's part of your instructor presence. Instruction that's also flexible, assessments that's are flexible, right? So I think like I consider a lot of these themes when I think about how do you prepare for your first week. So one of the first things that I do is I actually send them a welcome email 1 week before the course starts. And this kind of communication really helps students like feel better prepared for the semester. So, when the first week of class starts, they're already primed with what the course expectations are. This email, it doesn't have to be very long. I generally keep the tone very light and friendly. And, I'm saying people really read into the negative tone than the positive tone.
Sure.
It's helpful to kind of keep it more light, friendly. And this is one way of how I establish like course expectations, but also like, who they are going to be taking the class from. The second thing I do, and I create this ahead of time, I create like a short screencast. It's a 3 to 5 minute screencast, and just orienting students with, the course structure. So if I teach on Canvas, I just go through, what are the main elements that they will be, going through? What are some of the core features that they will be interacting with and engaging with? And I think this is really helpful because, I have had students, especially this semester, I have a lot of adult learners who are not very familiar with the Canvas environment too,
Sure.
right? I think it's really helpful for them having that video. And this reduces the questions that you typically get, like the first week of class. I think that was helpful, creating a screencast. Then the first week of class, what I usually do is I already bake this into like I call it the getting started portion, right? Or like a pre-module activity. And
Absolutely.
it's called the syllabus reconnaissance, or basically
Okay.
a quiz, yeah. And this is helpful because most students don't read the syllabus, right? And you hear this time and again from a lot of instructors, and I've seen this more commonly with undergraduate students too. So it's helpful doing a quick ungraded quiz. They can do it multiple times, but mainly like feature prompts that you really want students. Some of the frequently asked questions that you typically get from students, and you can also make this a short grading, maybe like light participation points for just doing that quiz. But that has been very helpful, like doing a syllabus reconnaissance activity. What else do I do? I also share the course schedule in the first week of class. And then if you meet with them, like if it's online synchronous, I think it's helpful to kind of go through the schedule so students know what the cadence is for, different weeks, what are the expectations. And I think kind of just referring to some of these primary documents like the syllabus, the schedule in the first week of class really helps students, reinforces also that idea that, hey, this is what you need to pay attention to. Like, everything is in the schedule, right? Or if things change, let them know that, you are able to be flexible with your schedule, but letting them know that, this is the spot where they can, get questions, or, any questions that they have about what readings that they have to do, or, the questions about the assignment. I think it's helpful.
Absolutely.
And what other things? Okay, I also do. I'm just thinking, what other things I do? It's called a learner inventory.
Okay.
So a learner inventory is helpful. It essentially, you're doing a survey just to question your students about their concerns, needs, also preference for online learning. So just kind of framing your questions around that learner inventory. So kind of gathering just a quick formative assessment of, like who your students are, I think is really helpful. So then you can plan out your assessments, or any issues that, you might see in the design, your course design. I think you can make some of these changes based on your current students, needs, because different students are different, right, every semester. So I think it's helpful to kind of modulate that based on that feedback.
When you get the with the student inventory, when you kind of like send out that survey, I'm assuming it's kind of a survey.
Mhm.
How do you generally build that, and how do you kind of use that information during the term?
What you so like so f- Even information, so for example, like last year, right, with the remote instruction, we make a lot of assumptions that students have a camera, students have this
Mm,
and that. So kind of even understanding what access to materials that they have, right?
mhm.
Or they even have access to that textbook. Do they have access? So the questions are mainly formulated around, do they have the tools to do the things that they can do to successfully navigate the course? And even like questions about their internet at home, then it's helpful to understand, okay, how are you going to engage students in, let's say if you want to do more of a live session, right, and then have them do course presentations, like, but if they don't have an appropriate bandwidth, it can be problematic. So maybe then having more flexibility of, okay, letting that student do a pre-recorded session, or emailing you, or other formats of their assignments that can still demonstrate their understanding.
I really love that kind of, because I think that it's really easy, especially for myself when I'm beginning to kind of craft out these student surveys. Like I feel like I kind of gravitate towards focusing on like the topic of what we're covering. Like, what's your familiarity with the Adobe
Yeah.
programs? What's your familiarity with like digital illustration? But I love that kind of focus as well of what kind of up camera do you have? What does your internet access look like? Who are you sharing maybe the space on the internet
Space.
connection with? Exactly. I love that kind of incorporation of text so that you're at least at the beginning of the term, you're helping to set the student up for success in your class and not needlessly kind of creating a barrier of
Yeah,
um, needing X, Y, and Z tool in order to complete something. I
absolutely.
absolutely love that.
Or like even some students, like we're saying, right, if they are having in a shared space, they don't want to use the camera, you don't necessarily need to have students participate by turning on the camera, right? So just understanding, like, what they are open to, I think then it's helpful in terms of also increasing their motivation, or, just the engagement, overall engagement with the course.
Absolutely. And so with kind of the welcome email, I love the short video intro to the course and how to use the course. I love the indirect modeling, kind of reaffirming, yes, the schedule is important. Yes, the syllabus is important. Yes, this is how we use the course. Love the inventory. Love the reconnaissance. What else do you generally do if you think about your instructional design courses that you're currently teaching or courses upcoming?
I also automatically incorporate, these are stuff like, remember I was talking about the getting started like module, like, so in
Yeah.
module I also incorporate, I call it an online readiness check, but I
Okay.
already have a it's essentially, I call it like a success to be an online learner. And these would be like, resources to how do you even communicate online, like rules for online communication, right? Ways you can talk to your students. Another is also like a lot of undergraduates come with very weak studying skills. So even
Yeah,
providing resources, because online learning includes a lot of like self-directed learning that most students are not familiar with, right? Or used to. So kind of just introducing the concept of, what goes into like, being a self-directed learner. How do you independently learn? What are the resources available? So even sharing resources, the learning center, the writing center, so I think just so in that module, what I call online readiness, I just make sure that I share those resources. Previously, I would also share like a short assessment. It's called an online
sure.
readiness check, where they just check in to see, and this is just to assess their readiness to learn online. So for example, it could be a technology check too, right? Do you have all of these tools? Do you like how to use this the canvas properly? You're familiar with the systems. There's a little technology kind of readiness check. Another one within that is also in that assessment also includes like, how are you, do you know how to your time management, right? Like, so a lot of like self-directed learning prompts also incorporated within that online readiness assessment. So that was very helpful for, I think, more undergraduate students, I would say.
Sure.
But for the graduate class that I'm teaching now, I don't really include that assessment, but I still include like the success as an online learner as a module. And my students have found that very helpful, because I do the end of the 2 weeks, I do a little, I call it my baby Yoda check-in.
Love it.
Kind of nice. I can share it with you sometime, but essentially it's baby Yodas in like different formats. Like, oh, I'm so anxious, but it's helpful because it's just a quick temperature check to see like, how are they doing? Are they struggling? Is the information clear to them? Are the projects clear? The rubrics clear, the prompts are clear. So I think like when I kind of gauge the temperature the second week, then I can make adjustments. And then
Mm,
anything that's not clear, then I quickly make a video to scaffold that complex construct, or anything that's not clear, even with the structure of the course design. Because like for us, we have our own bias, right? Like I think like, oh, it looks good, but then
sure.
from the user feedback, I think is also important, then to make those slight changes.
Absolutely.
I also do a prior knowledge check. It's called a knowledge.
Okay.
You must be familiar with this. Yeah. So this is where you can kind of slowly get them engaged with like the content. So like when I teach instructional design, it's just like, core, basically just like general, interesting, topics to kind of get them engaged, right? And I think it's helpful to do a quick prior knowledge check or a background knowledge probe, because then you can identify, students come with misconceptions too, right, about a field, about a topic. So generally what I do is, it's like general misconceptions in the fields. I think in education, like some of the general misconceptions is learning styles, right, or
Exactly.
tone of learning. So kind of I really disrupt some of these myths in the first week, like with these knowledge probes. It's been very helpful, but it's also interesting for students, because like, oh, I never knew about that. So you kind of like pique their interest also, in that subject.
Absolutely. And I feel like that also when you ask for the prior knowledge, when you start to activate what you already know or what you already think you know about something, I feel like you're getting a lot more buy-in from the students
Yeah.
as well because you're inviting them to bring their experience into the conversation so that you're using that more as a starting point for the conversation proper, which is how have you generally seen your students responding to that?
If it's like misconceptions, right, general misconceptions in education,
Yes.
let's say, right, like generally they do end up having like, yeah, I have this learning style and all, and then in the end when I address it, like in the announcement or something, it's like, oh, I never thought about that, right? Or like,
Yeah.
oh, I thought I was a visual learner, like, yeah, you must have preference for visually, like visual stuff, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're learning, right? So I
Exactly.
like it's helpful because it's like, yeah, it activates what they know, but it also clarifies like some of the misconceptions that they typically bring about the field.
Absolutely.
What else do I do? Oh, I do make a welcome video.
Cool.
uh, so this is just simple, and I think this is helpful for, especially if you're teaching a pure online asynchronous course. I think this is really helpful in terms of establishing your instructor presence, right? Bringing a little bit of your voice in the space that can be quite unfriendly, or more passive learning for some students. So I think it's helpful to kind of like have, it doesn't have to be a really long video. I just make a really short video just introducing myself. Typically I talk about my dogs a lot, or like my cooking dog or something, but then they at least know that, like, hey, I'm just this other person, right? Like I'm trying to make them feel successful in their class, and it's just kind of making it more personable. So I do that. I also have students, though, in the first week of class either do like a Flipgrid video,
Sure.
like video introductions, or sometimes I even give them a choice of like using their own tools, like on Powtoons or any other animation they have to introduce themselves. But this was more fun with, I think, undergraduates. I think they enjoyed this
Okay.
more. But for some graduate students, they just like, plain discussions, introductions, which is fine, right? I think, yeah.
Absolutely. I feel like that's kind of that modification you always make going into the first week. If you get a sense of how serious or how silly or kind of the personality of the class that you have from term to term. And I love that kind of attitude, that spirit of modifying the course proper to meet maybe the personality of the community that you're starting to build.
I think it's important to, like, this is part of classroom management, but I think it's important to set rules and very consistent, like, due dates. So in the first week, only be very clear. What's helpful is sometimes even building like a class charter. So, to have more students feel like, they're engaging. I think, even just have a shared Google Doc and just have students articulate, what is online etiquette, right? What are the norms, the expectations for this class? Very helpful. Like this semester, I don't know if I told you, but my whole class was a project-based class where they're working in groups. And it's very challenging because some students are international, some of them are like in Guam, like all over the place.
Yeah.
I think it was really helpful. Like the first week before they even dove into their projects, I had them just develop like their group charters, and having them write their own like shared norms, right? Like establishing like what is an inclusive group working environment really made their group work successful. Like I think there was only one group that had a little bit of challenge, right, with the communication.
Sure.
I was easily, I was able, I think it was more of the student, but in general, like with the other groups, everyone had a very smooth, run of their group project. I didn't see much challenge.
Absolutely. How with the shared Google Doc, how did you just because I love that kind of idea of asking students to generate their own norms, their own etiquette, their own agreement for this course that they're participating in. Love it. Love the Google Doc, obviously, because I am all about that simplicity. But how did you go about kind of creating this in Canvas, or like putting this together in Canvas for your students? What was kind of like the prep work or the setup that you needed to do for that?
So I provided samples, right? So I had a sample, like a charter. Like, so for example, before they even, this was already, I think it's helpful to build this as part of their project work. So
Sure.
when you assign it, like, it's part of like your grade, then there's more like, I guess, buy-in too, right? They like, I think they associate it with like, oh, it's important. But I think it's also giving that time and like saying like, okay, this 1 week you're just going to be you're going to be building your group charter. So in that in Canvas, I just created, like, it was a group assignment because it was the whole what was it, for the whole semester. And then one assignment was just creating your group charter. What I forgot the name of it. I think that's what it was called.
Sure.
And in that week, they for that assignment, I just provided samples of like previous student group charters. So then they had examples of how to write it, like if they were a little bit, like unsure of like, what to type and all that. But then I also gave them the freedom of like, this is not what I'm looking for. Like, in terms of the language, it doesn't have to be explicitly like this, but this is just an example that if you want to follow or you want to reference.
Absolutely. And I love that you kind of like built that into the timeline of the project proper of we're going to take a week or X amount of time to really think about like the structure of our group before we jump into beginning to work together as a pair, so that you at least have some semblance of rules.
Yeah,
exactly.
It was very helpful because like in the middle of the semester, I did a like conference check-in, right, with all of these groups. And like anything that was off, like, okay, let's go and look at your charter, right? Like, oh, whose role was this? Like, whose role was this? Like, let's say if someone missed submitting something for that assignment, like, because we had an assignment submitter, we had like a recorder, like, like different groups had their own names for the roles. But I think
Yeah.
having very clearly established roles was helpful, especially for these collaborative projects.
100%. And it sounds like it really came in useful for communication, just because you were saying if any issues were to pop up during a group check-in or a conversation, you at least had an established set of rules that you could pull from, to kind of generate more of a sense of comfort
Yep.
in the project proper.
So I think speaking of rules, I think this also kind of speaks to like the general course design too. I noticed what was helpful is just having very like consistency is really key, in an online learning space. And this really reduced confusions for students. So like even if you had assignment submission times, like I just made it the same for like, all discussions with like Sunday, midnight, 11:35 p.m.
Sure.
But everyone knew it was that time, and I barely changed. I maybe once because like some students wanted a deadline, but I kind of kept it light, and like the ones who wanted like a little bit more work, like I just let them submit it late, and it was fine. But I think it's helpful having like that very consistent due dates for your assignments or any kind of activities you're having.
Absolutely. If you do you have any advice? Because I know we have instructors who are teaching totally asynchronously, and I know that that's kind of a little bit of a different design than instructors that are teaching totally synchronously. So they are 100% live with their students on camera in real time. Do you have any advice for instructors who are totally live on camera with their students, those synchronous instructors, for how they might be able to develop a little bit more consistency or provide maybe some rules or structuring for that online session?
Yeah,
Any advice for like kind of chunking that, or
yeah,
what would you
absolutely.
recommend?
So I think like, you can still like, even if you're teaching a fully online synchronous course, I think it's helpful to borrow some useful ideas from an online asynchronous environment, like the whole notion of having Canvas as a space, right? So I always call it like your online class, like your
Yeah,
virtual class space, right? And I think it's helpful because then students know, even in an online synchronous course, like where do all of these documents live, right? Like your sign,
absolutely.
your syllabus, your schedules, like even these surveys that you're sharing. I think if you all have it in one place, so let's say even if you don't want to teach in Canvas, but you're just using Google, right? Like a Google Drive or whatever. But even just having it in like one space is helpful because then you reduce that cognitive overload for students it reduces the confusion of like where stuff is, and then you lose their attention and even the engagement with the class, right? So having it in
Absolutely.
one space, I think, is helpful, even if it's an online synchronous. Even in online synchronous class, I think it's helpful having very consistent due dates, though. So students, because see, like it's habits, right? And it's like as learners, like it's helpful, like having something consistent. There's a structure. Even in an online synchronous space, like having a weekly cadence of like where you're
Yeah,
being like, hey, I start here, I end there. Like I'm saying, isn't it helpful for anyone? Right?
exactly.
It's like it's
Absolutely.
not nebulous, right? And I think like any class that, even if it's in person, right, when you are not very clear with your instructions, that's when you lose the learner.
Absolutely. And I really like how you put that, of when you're able to reduce that like nebulousness, that kind
Uh,
of like I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be looking at feeling, when you have even some level of like a consistent structure for a student to look forward to, it makes it kind of easier to get into the rhythm of the class instead of spending 20 minutes trying to remember what your class was even about last time and how do I get into the class and what am I even doing. I really love that kind of consistency
And so, for
throughout.
example, like even if you use a number of tools, right, like have resources for like how do you access that tool, or like some students might not even know how to use Flipgrid, right? So like provide
Absolutely.
how to use Flipgrid or how do you submit. So I think like any kind of technological tool that you do incorporate in your instruction, I think it's helpful to kind of see it from the view of like a complete novice learner, that okay, like you're making them use this tool, but like, do they know how to use this tool, not just for learning that content or creating a content for your course, but like just even navigating that tool. So even if it's
Absolutely.
Canvas, right? Like if you're using Canvas, like even sharing in your first week of course, like how do you navigate Canvas? No, we make these assumptions that, oh, students just know how to use Canvas, but that might not be the case, right?
Absolutely. I kind of like that. The checking your own assumptions, because I know that's definitely, it's really easy to think like, oh yeah, Adobe is, so pervasive in the creative community. Everybody knows how to use InDesign or Illustrator or whatever, but really kind of being thoughtful and providing
Yep.
resources about Canvas, resources about the creative suite, resources about kind of interacting with the content you're asking students to interact with. Fantastic. So, Kendum, I have the standard question that I ask of, if you were, do you have any kind of like words of wisdom, any advice that you would give to somebody who's kind of jumping into online virtual teaching just off the bat? Something that, any kinds of recommendations, any kind of like quick tips, lesson learned from failures that you may have encountered, what would be your general advice for somebody who's just getting started with virtual learning?
I think my general advice, and I think this is because being a designer too, I think it's like plan right ahead of time. um Even if you think about in-person classes, like like you do lesson planning, right? So it's the same thing. I think like having a plan ahead is going to help you in terms of like uh being more aware of like hey, what you might run into, and especially like the first 2 weeks in an online class can be really like once it starts it's like woo, right? Even if it's online, like and like for example, like this semester when I was teaching instructional design, I developed this class like maybe a few months before the semester started. And then when the semester started, like my husband was like, he's like, it doesn't seem like you're really doing much, right? And I was like, well, it's all in cruise control. Like it's cruise control then, right? Because once you've already designed everything, like it's everything is there. So like the only place where I have to embed myself is maybe like I usually do an opening announcement, closing announcement
Exactly.
a week, right? Just like little here and there, like grading, right? Or a little bit of feedback, but the general, like the meat or the structure, like all of these things we're talking about, right, that keeps students engaged, that makes them like consistently be successful in class. I think if you it's good course design, right? If you already are able to design it ahead of time, then you might then you don't do much, and I think then it also leads to a much more effective instruction too, because you're not kind of
Absolutely.
planning on the fly, right? And when you're planning on the fly, then it can
It can
sometimes it
you
work out, sometimes it cannot go. Yeah, it can be a big mess too. So I think like planning ahead of time is really helpful for an online course. Especially if you're teaching as a first timer, I think it's helpful because you already start ahead. Another thing is I would it's not like a one size fits all kind of approach, right? When I say, hey, do a learner inventory or do this, like, yeah, these are really strong strategies that you can incorporate, but I would say like try a mix of things, and then
yeah,
see what like sticks, right? Like see what you also like, what's appealing to you as an instructor, what really fits into your content, your students, right? So I would like try a number of things. And the last advice is, I would say like just keep an open mind. It's a mindset thing with online teaching, right? Is, like your first class, you'd be like, oh, I don't know if the students, but I think like the more you keep teaching it, the more you and see like design is also not stagnant, right? Like already like after my this class, I'm actually planning to completely redesign my whole class. So
right.
so I think that's the thing is also like that's why I'm saying keep an open mind, is it's not like set in stone that like now it's the best. Like remember I was telling you, I don't think I'm going to do modules now, or like
Exactly.
I think like keeping an open mind about your design is helpful because it keeps improving, with time.
Exactly. I love that. I love that iterative approach, that kind of see how it works, see what
Yeah.
sticks, see what your students think, and let's revisit and make the course
Yeah.
even better. Khendum, I really, really appreciate you kind of taking the time to share some of your first week tips, share some of your extensive insight and expertise with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Crixus says also thank you.
Absolutely adorable.